Hello everyone, thank you for joining us at this Your Overseas Home webinar. My name is Abby and I'm an account manager here at Your Overseas Home. It's great to have so many of you watching with us today, whether you're watching live or on demand. Today we'll be chatting with Fabien from Fab Expat Services to discuss visas and relocation ahead of your property purchase in France. Today Fabien will be giving us his top 10 tips to moving over to France. We do invite that you post any questions you have for Fabien in the questions tab on the right hand side of your screen. We'll be answering the questions at the end of the webinar. If we don't have a chance to get around to everything today, don't worry, any unanswered questions will be forwarded over to Fabien and his team. Before we start, Fabien, could you just quickly introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about Fab Expat Services?
Sure. Thanks for the introduction, Abby. Well, you did a great job already, but yes. So I'm Fabien. I'm the founder, managing director of Fab French Insurance and Fab Expats, where we help with, well, hence the name, expat services, relocation services, and insurance. So we've been doing this for 10 years now, and a lot has happened in the meantime, whatever Brexit, some elections in the US. So it is an ever evolving field. So there's always some new stuff to learn and new events to catch up with. So hopefully we'll learn a couple of things this morning, this evening, depending on where you are. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm excited to hear a bit about your top 10 tips. I mean, kind of starting first, how do I choose the right visa for myself? When I start thinking about moving to France, how do I decide which is the right thing for me to do?
Well, one of the first pro tip I can give you is a language tip, because this one I love. It's like, in English, you've just said it, like you're excited to, and this is a sentence and a word you do not want to translate in French. I can tell you that, because in France and in French, we never excited. We never say that. If you translate that plainly, like, je suis excité, it means I'm aroused. So guys, if you use that word in French, you know what you're doing. So it's a trap. We're looking forward to things in French. We're never excited. This is a different context. But that being said, joke aside, yes, the type of visa you should be applying for. So first, the two main categories, the residency types of visas and non-residency type. So I'm in the context of this webinar, I'm considering you want to relocate permanently or semi-permanently in France, so that you'd be looking into a residency type, which would be a 12-month, well, enabling you to be up to 12 months a year in France, like all year long. But there are other types, like the 6-month visa or 6 to 12-month visa, which are non-resident type of visas. Then within the resident type of visas, there are another subcategory, which is either a work compatible visa or non-work compatible. So yet again, there's quite a few options. You have business types of visas, like the profession libérale, which we could call the consultant type of visa, the entrepreneur visa, which is a bit of a fancy word to describe everyone that's not a consultant, could be self-employed, but if you're in the trade industry or whatever. Then there are some things called the passeport talent. There's a lot of options there. We won't cover that today. And then there's the work visa. It's quite difficult to secure. You need to have a sponsor. But the most popular type of visa by far and large is a non-working type of visa, which ironically we've decided to call the visitor visa. But don't get me wrong, it's actually a permanent type of visa. But I mean, we like when things are a bit confusing in France, especially when it has to deal with paperwork. So that's by far the most popular, because it enables a lot of options. Like you can use this one obviously for retirees, second homeowners, if you just move to France and do not work, early retirees, if you're living out of your pension or rental income from abroad, even in some cases for some remote workers or business owners abroad. So it is almost kind of the jack of all trades. Again, there might be some tax considerations depending on your scheme, but so that's how you can choose. It's like depending on whatever you want to work or be a permanent resident or not. And obviously, in case you have any doubt, feel free to reach out with us. We offer free consultations for that, so that we help you decide if you're uncertain.
Perfect. That's really helpful, and actually has already spawned a question from one of our audience members, Jennifer, who is asking about something actually that I've heard a lot from the people that we've spoken with. Her question is quite specific to herself, but I know that it's something that comes up a lot. She's asking, what type of visa should I apply for if she's an author? She makes some small royalties from her books, but otherwise is classified as retired. Should she go for that visitor visa, or does she need to be looking down the self-employment route?
So another thing I like to say is that there's always more than one way to go, and often are more than one options. Okay. So, well, depending on what income we're talking about here. Actually, I could be specific. If she's making, for example, 60% of France minimum wage, or at least 60% of France minimum wage, then she could be looking at either a passeport talent. Well, actually, could be looking at a passeport talent, or there's one that's called the artiste. Let's call it the artist visa, okay, just for the sake of me pronouncing that. But yes, there's the artist visa, where any kind of artistic activity that would be seen as such. If you make 60% of France minimum wage, well, first, if you can factually prove that you're doing this as a professional activity, like you're being paid for this, and as long as you can, well, ideally demonstrate you've made, and you could be making 60% of France minimum wage, or even if you didn't make as much, but like build a plan or a case saying that you would be making at least 60% of France minimum wage, that is the sort of visa you can be using. And I would rather suggest this one because it's more flexible, and potentially could even lead to a multi-years residency permit. So basically fast track into residency. So again, that's one option. It's not the word of God. That's one option.
Perfect. When should I start applying for a French visa?
The sooner the better. So actually, there's always kind of the golden zone when applying for residency visas, like pretty much those permits. That's when you are within 3 months to 1 month prior to when it's a visa, the intended arrival date. When that's a residency permit, the expiry of your visa. So in anticipation, at least 3 months ahead. That's the ideal time frame. But again, the earlier the better, because, well, for those processes, there's often some documentation that's required. Sometimes it's easy to secure, but sometimes it is not. So, for example, the proof of address, I think maybe we'll talk about that later, but like it might take a couple of weeks for you to secure that, but it might take months. So the sooner you anticipate, the more you know what you're expected to provide, the better it would be. Yeah.
Perfect. And so when it comes to things like, I presume you've already mentioned that there may be things like proof of address. I presume there's also things like proof of income and finances. You've mentioned 60% of the the French minimum wage for things like the visa that Jennifer might end up going for. What kind of things am I going to need, and how do I send those over to someone like yourself?
Yeah. Well, same. There's no line in the sand, if you like, for this, but the better. I mean, ideally, if you can do that. So first, usually for the visitor type of visa, the non-working one, they want you to meet France minimum wage. No, it's only 60% for the artist, but so for all the other ones, actually, it's the minimum wage, which at the minute is roughly 1,400 euros net a month. Actually, it's 1,426, but let's round that up to 1,400. So by far and large, the easiest solution, because you want to make sure that they understand your, well, if it's income you're using, that it's stable, that, they can trace that, they can understand where it's, what this income is tied to. So like, for example, if it's pension income, it needs to be clear. So a bank statement, and a bank statement that covers at least 90 days is something that should be the top option if it's an option on the table. If you meet the requirements there, like if we can see either you're drawing down from a private pension scheme, or you get paid by Social Security from the US, or you have a pension deposit, whatever, but like, you make sure you have that 90 days bank statement. The pro tip here is you grab yourself one of those, you actually highlight those lines so that they can see the income. And if you want to go the extra mile, you comment with a pen, and you say pension month 1, pension month 2. And as long as they can understand and build that picture, that's going to be a pass. There's one thing as well. France is fairly generous with that pillar. I like to call those pillars. There's a proof of income, proof of address, proof of medical coverage. The proof of income could also be substituted or topped up with savings. So like, let's say you have 0 income, then you can top it up, we could say, with 100% of that requirement they want you to meet in savings, which again, I'll run up the numbers because I'm not a robot, so off the top of my head, but like roughly 18,000 euros. If you have that lump sum in savings, needs to be available savings, okay? Could be stocks and stuff, but it needs to be clear that it's instantly available. Like, you could draw that down if you'd like tomorrow. So that's why, again, ideally a bank statement with the bottom line that says 18,000, that would always qualify. Okay. And if you have income, obviously, well, the more income, the better. And then you could have, if you meet, again, the income requirement, you need 0 savings, okay? It's not both you need, it's either. Could be a mix of both, but yeah.
Perfect. We've actually just had a question in just now asking, is that amount less for a couple? So if you're coming over as a married couple, how does that impact the monthly amount that you'll require?
Yeah, very good question. So this one is actually, I'll answer in a typically French manner, starting by it depends. Now, but technically speaking, so on paper, it doesn't change anything. So that's why I would always advise you try to meet the requirement by the book. Like if it's 2 people, it's twice the amount. There is a discount, like it's a lower requirement for kids, for example, or for other types of dependents. For a couple, in theory, it's 2 times the requirement, in theory. In real life, there's a bit of a political situation here. So they do apply, let's say, a discount. It depends. Coming from the US, the UK, I've seen as low as 25,000, actually even lower than that. But like, I'm considering late of last year or this year, so that to have recent data, I've seen 20,000 euros combined accepted. Okay, so a lot less. But like this year, like recently, the lowest I've seen accepted was 24,000. So it's much less than 36,000 that you should be meeting. Okay, so obviously the more the better. And if you do not meet the requirement by the book, then it depends on the tolerance they'll be happy to apply in your case. So again, that's why my advice is try to meet that. But yes, there is an unwritten allowance. In the US, I've seen lower than $30,000 being accepted as well. So, there's definitely this political flexibility. Actually, if anything, they're a bit more flexible in the UK. So they're a bit more willing to lower the bar because they're a bit more strict on the medical requirements, for example. So, again, those are unwritten rules again, okay? But yes, there is some flexibility, some room for that.
Perfect. And I know that you've mentioned things like proof of medical insurance and things like that. Could you talk us through what kind of is the healthcare side of getting a visa and how does that impact me?
Yes, well, I'll be honest. Also, it depends where you come from. From the UK, this is the leading reason for visa. Well, it feels like fear mongering. I'd say visa rejection. It's not really rejection, but like for the visa to not be accepted up front, like for the consulate offices to actually ask for an update of your policy because they consider the document to be non-compliant. So that's the leading cause for non-accepted visas. So that's the main risk. And it could even end up with you being rejected and having to reapply, which you can do straight away, but then you would have lost the whole application process. Because what they want to see, so wherever you're from, but I was just saying, in the UK, that's the leading cause. That's the second cause in the US, so that's still quite, but okay. What they want to see is private medical insurance. Because again, we're considering you'd be living abroad. So you'd be living in France permanently as a resident. So travel insurance does not cover you as a resident. They cover you as a tourist for a few months, but then you're supposed to go back. Actually, by definition, there is a start and an end date, which, like, if you relocate to France, there's no end date. Like, you're going there. Well, in theory, at least. So that's why they expect to see private medical insurance, because that's supposed to be potentially an ongoing policy. That's the one thing. They have strict requirements. They do not want any sort of, copay, core insurance, deductible, excess, whatever your language, whatever you call it. It needs to be, as we call in France, from the first euro. Okay, so which unfortunately tends to increase the premium. But that's the reason why we created Fab French Insurance and a policy that's dedicated to that, so that it could be as cheap as legally possible. And they want to be, they want you to have repatriation on your policy as well. So yeah, so that's important. There is a wild card though, coming from the UK. If you have a state pension, you can use something called the S1 program. This is a post-Brexit agreement that's been kept, basically voiding the insurance requirement for the S1 holder.
Yeah, I've heard of that before. I know that comes up. A lot of people that we speak to mention that. So that's helpful. So obviously now, let's say I've kind of got all of these things sorted. I've probably spoken to you. I'm obviously now going to have a visa interview. Can you give us some tips as to the way to behave in that interview? What should I bring? All of those kinds of things.
Yeah, so if you meet the three pillars we've mentioned, again, so you have an address, you have income or savings, and you have that insurance policy, then it's just about paperwork. You can then, file your application on, francevisa.gov.fr, and then you schedule an interview indeed at a visa center, and then you attend this. So most of the time, actually a lot of clients, I'm asking a lot of clients, how was it? How's it been? Can you describe the interview process? A lot actually joke about that and say, well, this is no interview, it's like a handover. We're just handing the documentation over. They get our fingerprints. There's a few admin steps, but there's no interview, or not in the way we could imagine by the word interview. And it looks a bit scary, like someone's going to pull a headlamp in your face or something. No. That being said, it's important to come prepared though, because there will be double checking your documentation. If you apply as a couple, that's going to be one after another. Okay. It's usually like 15, 20 minutes process. And they may ask questions though, often probably only to double check things, but also they'll be listening to whatever you say. And a couple of weeks ago, this happens quite frequently and quite often. We see that quite often. We've had a visa denied. So one of our clients, not us, but so because they were doing the process on their own. They went at the visa center through this interview. They were probably a bit too excited. Well, he was a guy, and he was applying for a non-working type of visa. And during the process, which by the way, you could have he was a French property owner. He had a property there, and you can run a gîte business, like a rental type of activity, if the rent, like let's say the turnover you're generating is under a certain threshold. This is not going to be seen as a business. This is going to be seen as a non-professional. And the threshold is quite generous. It's 23,000 at the minute per year. So, but nevertheless, although this potentially is visa compliant, the guy went there all excited, was checking all the boxes, but during the interview said that, I have the income, I have the savings, I have property in France. Don't worry, even and if I don't have enough money, it's okay, because I'll be running a business in France as a gîte owner. And boom, he said the keyword business, running a business in France, and he was applying for a non-working visa. So again, the situation would have been completely okay and completely legit, but he said something that tipped them off. So that's why I'm saying, be prepared. You're still going through a legal process. So just answer the questions you're being asked. Nothing more. And well, hold on your horses. Don't be too excited, because the guys there, they're not excited. They'll be staying wherever they are. You are going to live an adventure. They're not. So don't tell too much, because you might tip them off. And whatever you say to them, they'll have to report it. And especially if they don't know which boxes it should fill into, they may come and say, this seems odd, and reject your file because they think it's odd, just because of that. Like, these guys, just because it sounded off, was completely legit, but sounded off, so they dismissed it.
Yeah, of course. I mean, that makes sense. And actually, it kind of does tie into a question that Caroline answered. I think you've sort of answered that there. So Caroline was asking, should she go for the entrepreneur visa if she just wants to run a small gîte business? But I suppose it depends on how affluent that gîte business becomes, and it's probably worth her speaking to you to decide kind of what that would look like.
Yeah, well, but it's a good question, because it leads into a concept that we can touch base on. So the first question is exactly what, like you said, yeah, it depends if it's going to be less or more than 23,000 euros. If it's going to be less, or, well, and especially if you don't know, then you consider it's going to be less, then the visitor visa is much easier to secure. If it's going to be more than that, then indeed the entrepreneur visa, knowing that there's also, if you're investing into that property and all of that, and with the intention of running a business, there's also sometimes the passeport talent that might be used. I'm just saying it's food for thought for some people that might be watching. Because then basically there is with the passport talent, that the entrepreneur passport talent, if you invest 30,000 or more, but which is the case when you're going to buy a property to run a business in there. Anyway, you can start with a non-working visa. And if, for example, year 1, year 2, you do less than 23,000, let's say on year 3, then you exceed that, you do 30, 40,000, like that, business is booming. Good for you. It's also always doable. And please inform the prefecture. So, the governmental office in France deals with residency as quickly as you're aware of the situation, basically. But you can inform the authorities, say, oh, well, okay, my situation changed or is changing. I need to have like a business type of visa or work authorization, whatever you require at this stage. And actually reach out, and you can change from one to another. If that happens too quickly, like within 6 months, let's say, there's the risk that the prefecture considers you may have tried to apply for an easier type of visa to get. And therefore, there's the risk that they tell you upon visa expiry to go back to your home country to reapply for the right one. So that's why I'm saying it's completely okay. It's not automatic, okay? Actually, 70% of the time, when you ask for a change of stay, that's the change for the reason of the stay, which is basically from non-working to working visa, 70% of the time to accept that, okay? But obviously, the sooner you change that, the more hard it will look, because they might think you're trying to dodge or the system. So the risk is there. But vice versa, the later you do that, this is always an option on the table, and it's completely doable. So if you don't know how much you're going to make, then the visitor visa is probably a better option. There are also some tax implications, but let's not deep dive too deep.
Perfect. So you've just mentioned there kind of year 1, year 2, year 3. When should I start applying for renewal? How does that side of things work?
Yeah, very easy to answer. Same as the visa. Even earlier, if you can, like you can start as early as 4 months prior to visa expiry. And I would strongly suggest you do that again as quickly as you can. But personally, I would say the ideal application window is 90 to 30 days prior to this. Well, actually, no. The application window is technically 90 to 30 days. Obviously, if you pass 30 days, like if you're less than 30 days prior to visa expiry, that's going to be too late. There's always a possibility to ask for a late notice and, an exemption so that, you have more time and stuff, but they won't like it. You don't want to be in that category, okay? You don't want to have waited until you're less than 30 days from visa expiry. So 3 months is the best time frame, but you can stick with the same time frame as the same timeline as the visa, okay? At least 90 to 30 days prior to that renewal or expiry.
Perfect. I know that you've kind of mentioned, tax implications and things like that. I know we don't really want to go too much into that today. We kind of don't have too much time actually, but what kind of things should I be thinking about? Will I be filing my taxes in France? How does that kind of side of things work for me?
Yes. So yes, but it's a very good question, because first, we don't necessarily, especially with the UK, we don't have the same tax season. So the tax period in France is 1st of January to the 31st of December. Although we do file at the same time, which is in May, we file our taxes at the same time. But something that's very, very often overlooked and misunderstood is that the minute, if you apply for a resident type of visa, Okay, so the one that's renewable from France that you can convert into a French residence permit, the day, like from the very first day your visa got started, you are considered a French permanent resident, meaning a French taxpayer. Maybe you would be filing your taxes. Like, for example, if you're from the US, you have pensions, retirement pensions from the US. This is tax-free according to the French Franco-US tax treaty. Okay, so you will have to file your taxes. Maybe you're not going to be a French taxpayer, but you will. And from the first day your visa got started, you are a French taxpayer. So a lot of people are still paying taxes, filing and paying taxes in the UK, in the US. Maybe they should, maybe not. And if you don't file in France, eventually that's going to be a problem. So this is and same for properties. Actually, the main issue is probably with properties. You have a property, let's say in the UK, you're selling it, you move to France with your visa. It's on the market when you move, but it's not yet sold. And it's sold, let's say, a month after you've moved. Well, technically speaking, it's a second home because your visa got started. You're now a French resident. You're no longer a resident in that property in the UK. So it is subject to taxes on capital gains.
Okay, that's helpful to understand. And
for time frames, it's an important question.
Yeah, of course. And I know obviously that oftentimes when we talk about this kind of thing, relocating to France or even just here at Your Overseas Home, we're often talking about buying a property and moving into a property you own. How do things differ if I'm renting? What kind of things should I be concerned about in terms of that side of things, if that's the choice I go down first?
Yeah, well, actually, this is a pillar we didn't detail much, but like the proof of address. The proof of address can be, like, legally speaking, there's only one of those three options. Either a property you own, so the acte de vente authentique, which is a proof of ownership of a property in France, or a 1-year rental contract, but it's not the same kind of contract as you have actually both in the US and the UK. It's actually reversed in France. Like, as a tenant, if you have a 1-year contract in France, you can actually walk away with no penalty, depending on the contract, within 1 or 3 months. Like, hello, the bubble. Literally, you can get a 1-year contract, and then the day after you've signed it, walk away with no penalties. Okay, you will have a notice, again, 1 or 3 months, depending on the rental agreement, but that's it. So it's not as strict as it is in other countries, and it doesn't cost much. Although landlords definitely won't like that if you're trying to pull that kind of stunt. But this is why it's one of the, because it then would be seen as a permanent address. That's why they want a 1-year contract. The third option is a letter from, let's say, family, friends, or an acquaintance you would know in France who would be happy to state they're happy with you using their address. Okay, that's it. It's either going to be one of those which are technically visa compliant. In some countries, especially the countries where they're quite far away from France, okay, I'm talking plane distance, they have a bit of a tolerance and can accept Airbnbs and stuff. But again, we're back to political allowance here. So legally speaking, it's only one of those three. And so if you're renting, because of what I've said, it's harder to find rent in France because it's actually not the tenant, it's the landlord who's going to be committed to the tenant for 1 year. Even actually, if you stop paying and start squatting, they cannot expel you for 1 year. The tenant, that's why we call it a 1-year contract, because the landlord is committed to the tenant for 1 year. So it's reversed compared to what you used to, both in the US and the UK. Like, if you get a 1-year contract in the UK, like, you have to see it through as a tenant for 1 year. That's reversed in France. So because of that, it's harder to find rent in France. We do have services, we can help you with that, but I'm saying this is why some people might see that as a struggle, okay? So yes, like you were saying, that's why obviously the holy grail is to have your own property when you move there, because this one, and also this is an unwritten rule, although theoretically it doesn't change anything if you're a French property owner upon application on your visa. But again, considering you meet the three pillars, Well, apart from the case I've described, the guy who was saying I'll be running a business, I've never seen, just once, but I've never seen a French properties owner's visa application being denied. And we do more than 1,000 applications, like sometimes even close to 2,000 each year. And we've been doing that for 10 years. So this is an unwritten rule. If you have a property in France, that's going to give you an edge for your visa application. Yeah.
Perfect. Caroline's actually asked a sensible question actually with regards to the proof of address side of things. So she's saying, can you put down the address of the property that you have, put an offer in, it's been accepted, before the contracts have been exchanged? At what point effectively can you use the address of the property you plan to purchase?
Very good one. Actually, something we help our clients quite often with. Technically speaking, no, you need to, because it's probably the compromis de vente you've signed, and it's only when it's through, you've seen through the process, you're exchanging the final contract, which again we call the acte de vente authentique. It's only at this final stage and it's considered yours, and you can use that for visa purposes. So you have to see the whole process through. However, almost all the time, the current owners, the ones you're buying from, would probably be more than happy, should you reach out, to either be writing that letter I've mentioned, attestation d'hébergement, that's how it's called in French, or even write you a rental agreement, like a one-year one, which is going to end when you actually take over the property. But that this way, you can use this address already, even though it's not yet completely yours. Okay? So it's kind of a trick. It's not illegal. It's actually completely legal. It's going to be yours after all. But if you just use it as is, it's not going to work.
Great. And I know this from working with you quite a bit, but there are a lot of times in France, but also the rest of Europe, times where it's maybe not the best to try and connect with you guys, particularly about paperwork. Are there any kind of holidays we should be avoiding, things that we should be aware of, make sure that our visa application isn't slowed down and things like that?
Well, yes, the pro tip is if you can look at the school holidays in France, as well, especially the Parisians one. And yes, all those periods are going to be a bit slower. But most importantly, summertime. And we vary, it's almost like a cult. There's one particular period, which is between the 15th of July and the 15th of August, where basically everything's on hold in France. Like everything's on hold. So it's always possible to get some things done, but it is going to be slow. And on average, actually, this is both the bright side and sometimes the frustrating side of France. It's like the French like to take their time. If it's lunchtime and we're entitled to like a 2 hours lunch break, we're going to take the 2 hours. If it's 6 p.m., we're off work, we're going to leave the office most of the time and not care about any single file we should have been dealt with this day, and we'll resume that tomorrow. So that means that the quality of life in France is the one that, you've heard about so often. That's probably why, one of the reasons you like France, but also that's why things are slower. And therefore, that particular period in summer is the busiest and the slowest. So when you apply for a visa, it translates in waiting times, and the turnover to get a visa done during that period is typically 3+ weeks. Whereas on average, it's more like 2 weeks, sometimes even less than that, like a week. Like right now, like in the UK, for example, January was like more like a week, US was different. There's a bit of a political situation, let's say. So, but, and there's that as well. But that period, 15th of July, 15th of August, ideally is to be avoided. Yeah. Unless you have some time. Yeah.
Yeah. Great. I know that we've already overran, and there have actually been quite a few questions in the chat, but what I think we'll do with those ones is we'll send the information and the questions over to Fabien, and he'll get in touch with you all separately. There's quite a selection to go through. So I think for the time being, we'll wrap up this webinar today. It's been really insightful for me hearing about everything that you've been able to give us in terms of tips, and I'm sure that everybody else has also really enjoyed their time hearing your top tips. I know that we'll be putting a link to our Trustpilot on the screen now. So if you would like to leave us a review, you can also meet with Fabien at our virtual event on March 22nd. And we'll be releasing some appointments that you can book in with him as well then. So if you do want to have a longer conversation with him, that's a perfect opportunity to do that. We'll also send you the link to speak with Fabien at a later stage and to his website and things like that. So thank you so much to everybody for their time today. If you do have any further questions, please get in touch with us here at Your Overseas Home or directly with Fabien himself. And hopefully we can help you with your move to France.
Hopefully. Thank you so much for being there. Thank you for your very good questions. I'll try to answer every one of you that I didn't answer this day in a follow-up email. I'll need to go to the upper row, so that's not going to be right now, but soon, I promise.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks.
Bye.